"Take off that uniform," Detective Ethan Cole said, his voice carrying across the courtroom with the weight of a verdict long before any judge had spoken. The words hung in the air for a second, sharp and cold, and every conversation in the room died instantly. Reporters lowered their phones. Attorneys stopped flipping through legal pads. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed louder than before. At the center of it all sat Captain Maya Brooks, a black military police officer whose dark navy dress uniform looked almost untouched beneath the bright courtroom lights. Her medals caught faint reflections from the tall windows overlooking downtown Atlanta, but she made no effort to draw attention to them. She simply sat still, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes fixed forward. To anyone watching, she looked calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that made people wonder what was happening behind the silence. Across the room, Detective Cole stood near the witness stand. Tall, broad-shouldered, gray beginning to show at his temples. For nearly 20 years, he had been one of the most recognizable faces in law enforcement across the state. News stations called him a hero. City officials praised his leadership. His photograph hung in precinct hallways. To many people, his word carried more weight than evidence itself. And today, he was pointing directly at Maya Brooks. "That uniform represents honor," he continued. "It represents service. It represents trust. And if the allegations against her are true, she has no right to wear it." A murmur swept through the gallery. Maya could feel hundreds of eyes settle on her shoulders like invisible weight. Some faces held curiosity. Others held suspicion. A few carried something colder. Judgment. The judge adjusted her glasses, but said nothing. The silence stretched. Maya remained motionless. Her father used to tell her that silence could reveal more about a room than words ever could. Sitting there now, she understood exactly what he meant. The courtroom had already begun deciding who she was. The allegations had dominated headlines for weeks. According to official reports, Maya had used excessive force during a joint operation involving local police and military law enforcement. A suspect had been injured. Questions had followed. Investigations had begun. Then came the media storm. Television anchors debated her actions nightly. Online commentators dissected every photograph they could find. Some called her reckless. Others called her dangerous. Very few had asked what actually happened. Cole turned toward the jury box, confidence radiating from every movement. "The facts will speak for themselves," he said. "They always do." Several reporters immediately began typing. Maya watched their fingers move across keyboards from the corner of her eye. Facts. That word echoed through her mind. Facts were supposed to matter. Facts were supposed to protect the truth. Yet somehow, the truth felt farther away than ever. Outside, storm clouds rolled across the Georgia sky. The sunlight that had streamed through the windows moments earlier began to fade, leaving the courtroom bathed in cooler shades of gray. Maya lifted her chin slightly, not in defiance, not in pride, simply because she refused to look down. She could still hear her father's voice from years ago. "Integrity is what you keep when everything else is taken away." The judge glanced toward the clerk. Papers shifted. A monitor near the witness stand flickered to life. Somewhere in the back row, a camera lens clicked softly. And for the first time that morning, Maya noticed something strange. Detective Cole wasn't looking at the evidence screen. He wasn't looking at the judge. He was looking directly at her. Not with confidence, not with certainty, but with something far more dangerous. Fear. And in that moment, Captain Maya Brooks realized this trial might not be about proving her guilt at all. The clerk called for order, and the low murmur inside the courtroom slowly faded into silence. Maya Brooks remained seated at the defense table, her posture straight despite the pressure surrounding her. The cool air from the ceiling vents brushed against her face, carrying the faint scent of old wood, printer ink, and polished marble. She had spent years inside military facilities across the country, from training grounds in Texas to command centers outside Washington, District of Columbia, but nothing felt quite like this room. In the military, facts came first. Here, perception seemed to arrive before truth. A reporter in the front row leaned toward another and whispered something while glancing in Maya's direction. She had seen that look before. It was the look people gave when they thought they already knew your story. The judge reviewed a stack of documents while attorneys organized binders across long tables. Every sound felt amplified. Every movement seemed important. Yet Maya felt strangely detached from it all, as if she were watching events unfold from a distance. Her attention drifted briefly toward the gallery. The seats were crowded. Local officials, members of the press, curious citizens, people who had never met her but somehow felt qualified to decide who she was. There was only one empty seat near the back corner. It had remained empty since the hearing began. Maya noticed it because she had secretly hoped someone might occupy it. A former colleague, a friend, anyone. But nobody came. Not because she lacked people who cared about her. Many did. They simply could not risk becoming part of the controversy surrounding the case. That was how these situations worked. Allegations spread faster than explanations. She understood that better than most. 3 weeks earlier, her phone had barely stopped ringing. Then the headlines arrived. Calls disappeared. Messages slowed. Invitations stopped. Silence replaced support. Across the room, Detective Ethan Cole spoke quietly with 2 attorneys. His confident expression had returned, but Maya could not forget what she had seen moments earlier. That flash of fear in his eyes. It had lasted less than a second. Most people would have missed it entirely. Maya had not. Military training taught observation. Small details often revealed the largest truths. She folded her hands together and looked toward the American flag standing beside the judge's bench. The fabric barely moved in the conditioned air. For a moment, she remembered standing beside another flag years ago during a deployment ceremony. Her father had been there that day. He had worn his best suit despite the summer heat. Afterward, he placed a hand on her shoulder and said something she never forgot. Character is easiest when everyone believes in you. Real character begins when nobody does. The memory settled over her like a blanket. Calm, steady, familiar. The courtroom doors suddenly opened. Several heads turned. A man carrying a sealed evidence case entered and walked directly toward the clerk's station. Conversations immediately stopped again. The case was larger than Maya expected. Metal latches reflected the overhead lights as it was placed carefully on the evidence table. Even from where she sat, she could feel a subtle shift move through the room. Something important had arrived. The judge noticed it too. She removed her glasses and stared at the container for several seconds before addressing both legal teams. Maya followed her gaze. Whatever was inside that case had the power to change everything. And judging by the expression on Detective Cole's face, he knew it. The metal latches clicked open with a sound that seemed far louder than it should have been. Every eye in the courtroom followed the movement. The evidence technician lifted the lid carefully and removed a sealed hard drive, several printed reports, and a thick folder-marked chain of custody. The judge leaned forward slightly. Even the reporters who had spent the morning typing nonstop paused to watch. Maya Brooks remained seated, but her attention sharpened. For weeks, she had heard rumors about missing evidence, delayed transfers, and administrative reviews that never seemed to move forward. Now, for the first time, something tangible sat in plain sight. Detective Ethan Cole folded his arms across his chest. His expression looked controlled, almost bored, but Maya noticed the small details. The tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers pressed against his sleeve, the slight shift of weight from one foot to the other. They were tiny movements. Most people would never notice them. Maya did. The judge addressed the courtroom. For the record, this evidence was submitted under emergency review late last night. A ripple moved through the gallery. Emergency review. Those words carried weight. They suggested something important had happened behind closed doors. One of the attorneys rose immediately. Your Honor, my office was not informed this material existed. The judge nodded. Neither was the court until approximately 11:37 last evening. More whispers spread through the room. Reporters exchanged glances. Pens moved quickly across notebooks. Maya watched the reactions carefully. The surprise appeared genuine. Whatever had arrived inside that case had not been part of anyone's original plan. Outside the courthouse, rain finally began tapping softly against the windows. Gray light filtered across the polished wood surfaces, giving everything a colder appearance. The evidence technician connected the hard drive to the courtroom monitor system. A loading symbol appeared on the large screen. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The silence felt heavy enough to touch. Maya found herself thinking back to the day everything changed. The operation had begun before sunrise. The briefing room smelled like coffee and damp jackets. Local officers and military personnel filled folding chairs while maps were projected across a screen. It was supposed to be routine, organized, controlled. Yet from the beginning, something felt wrong. Questions had been dismissed too quickly. Procedures had been adjusted without explanation. Maya remembered noticing Detective Cole standing near the front of the room that morning. Confident, relaxed, certain that everyone would follow his lead. The memory faded as the courtroom monitor flickered. A video directory appeared on screen. Dozens of files filled the display. Date stamps, timestamps, camera labels. The evidence technician froze briefly before turning toward the judge. "Your Honor," he said carefully. "According to the metadata, these files were created on the day of the incident." The room instantly became still again. Maya felt her heartbeat slow instead of accelerate. Truth had a strange effect. It often arrived quietly. Detective Cole stared at the screen without blinking. The judge looked toward both legal teams. "We will review the contents in full." Nobody objected. Nobody interrupted. Then Maya noticed something that made her sit a little straighter. One of the video files carried a label she had never seen before. Not police body camera footage. Not security footage. The label read Federal Auxiliary, Recording Unit 7. And judging by the sudden loss of color in Detective Cole's face, he had not expected anyone to find it. No one spoke as the cursor hovered over the file name. The courtroom monitor cast a pale glow across rows of faces, turning expressions into frozen masks of anticipation. Rain continued tapping against the tall windows overlooking downtown Atlanta, a steady rhythm that seemed to count down towards something inevitable. The evidence technician glanced toward the judge. She gave a single nod. The file opened. Grainy footage filled the screen. A timestamp appeared in the corner. The date matched the day everything had fallen apart. The angle was different from any recording Maya Brooks had previously seen. Higher, wider, unfiltered. The camera overlooked an industrial corridor behind a shipping complex near the edge of the city. Stacks of metal containers lined both sides of the roadway. Emergency lights flashed in the distance. Voices echoed through the recording, distorted by wind and traffic. The gallery leaned forward almost as one. Reporters stopped typing. Even the attorneys seemed to forget their prepared arguments. Everyone watched. Maya felt the familiar tension in her shoulders return. Not fear. Recognition. She remembered that morning clearly now. The cold air. The smell of diesel fuel drifting through the loading area. The confusion that spread when radio communications suddenly became inconsistent. At the time, nobody had understood why certain instructions contradicted others. Looking back, the inconsistencies seemed impossible to ignore. On screen, officers moved through the corridor while coordinating positions. Military personnel remained near designated checkpoints. Procedures appeared orderly, professional, exactly as official reports had described. For a moment, Detective Ethan Cole relaxed. The confidence slowly returned to his face. His attorneys exchanged subtle glances. One even reached for a pen as though preparing to make notes. Then the footage continued. The camera shifted toward a section of the operation omitted from every report submitted to the court. A narrow access road appeared. Several vehicles were visible near a restricted gate. Maya immediately recognized the location. Her eyes narrowed. She had never been shown footage from that angle. Not once during the investigation. The courtroom remained silent. The recording timestamp advanced minute by minute. Then a voice emerged through the audio. Clear, distinct, unmistakable. Detective Cole. Several heads turned toward him instantly. The words themselves were not dramatic. They were procedural, but they revealed something important. The instructions being given on screen did not match the instructions documented later in official records. A few jurors exchanged uncertain looks. One reporter slowly lowered her phone. Another stopped typing entirely. The judge leaned forward. Her expression hardened. Maya watched the monitor without blinking. More commands followed. More discrepancies appeared. Small details. Tiny contradictions. Alone, each one seemed insignificant. Together, they formed a pattern. The confidence that had carried Detective Cole through most of the hearing began to fade again. His jaw tightened. His eyes never left the screen. The evidence technician continued playing the recording. Nobody interrupted. Nobody objected. Then the video reached a moment that made Maya's pulse quicken. A second vehicle entered the frame from the far side of the access road. It had never appeared in any official photograph. Never appeared in any written report. Never appeared during weeks of testimony. Yet there it was, visible in plain sight. The courtroom seemed to stop breathing. Even the rain outside felt quieter. The vehicle rolled slowly forward before stopping near the gate. The timestamp froze for half a second as the file buffered. Then the image sharpened again. Maya recognized the license plate immediately, and judging by the expression spreading across Detective Cole's face, he recognized it too. The image remained frozen on the courtroom screen for several long seconds. Nobody seemed willing to speak first. The vehicle sat motionless near the restricted gate, captured by a camera angle that had somehow remained hidden through weeks of investigations, interviews, and testimony. Maya Brooks felt the air shift around her. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The confidence that had filled the room earlier was beginning to crack. The judge studied the monitor carefully before turning toward the evidence technician. "Continue." Her voice was calm, but it carried a firmness that instantly commanded attention. The video resumed. The vehicle door opened. A figure stepped out. The image quality was not perfect, but it was clear enough. Several people in the gallery leaned forward. Reporters exchanged startled looks. One attorney removed his glasses and stared directly at the screen. Maya never took her eyes off the footage. She remembered that vehicle. More importantly, she remembered being told it was never there. During multiple interviews, she had been informed that no additional personnel had entered the area during the operation. Every official summary repeated the same conclusion. Every report confirmed the same timeline. Yet the screen now showed something entirely different. The timestamp advanced. The unidentified individual walked toward the gate and spoke briefly with personnel stationed nearby. No confrontation appeared. No emergency unfolded. But the interaction itself created a problem. The records presented to the court indicated that the restricted area had remained secure and unchanged during that period. The footage suggested otherwise. A murmur rolled through the gallery. The judge immediately called for silence. Detective Ethan Cole remained standing, but his posture had changed. Earlier, he had projected certainty. Now he seemed focused on the screen with unusual intensity, as though hoping the next few seconds might somehow reverse what everyone had already seen. They did not. The footage continued. More personnel appeared. Additional movements occurred near the access road. Small details accumulated one after another. None seemed dramatic alone. Together, they raised uncomfortable questions. Maya noticed several jurors taking notes for the first time that day. One woman wrote continuously without looking up. Another man kept glancing between the monitor and Detective Cole. The contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. Then a new document appeared beside the video feed. The evidence technician displayed an official operation log recovered with the recording files. Rows of timestamps filled the screen. Vehicle entries, personnel movements, authorization records. The technician highlighted one line. A vehicle authorization request. The same license plate visible in the footage. The room grew still again. The request carried an approval code. Maya felt her pulse steady. She recognized the code format immediately. It belonged to a supervisor-level authorization system. Someone with significant authority had approved access. Yet no such approval appeared in the records previously submitted to the court. The judge slowly removed her glasses. Her expression revealed nothing, but her silence felt heavier than any question. Across the room, Detective Cole swallowed and looked briefly toward his legal team. It was the first time all day he seemed unsure where to focus his attention. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the city skyline. Inside, nobody noticed. Every eye remained fixed on the monitor as the next file prepared to load. And as the progress bar crept forward, Maya realized the hidden recording had done more than challenge a report. It had opened a door that someone had worked very hard to keep closed. The courtroom grew unusually quiet after the final frame disappeared from the monitor. No new evidence appeared. No attorneys rushed to speak. Even the reporters seemed reluctant to break the silence that had settled across the room. Outside, the rain continued falling over Atlanta, tracing thin lines down the tall glass windows. The city beyond looked distant now, softened by gray clouds and mist. Maya Brooks sat motionless at the defense table. For the first time all morning, nobody was staring at her with open suspicion. Nobody was whispering. Nobody was pointing. The change was subtle, but she felt it. The weight pressing against her shoulders had not vanished, yet it had shifted. Questions that once pointed toward her were beginning to point somewhere else. She lowered her eyes briefly toward her folded hands. The gold edge of her service ring caught a reflection from the overhead lights. It reminded her of another rainy day years earlier. She had been 22, standing outside a military training facility in Virginia. Her boots were soaked. Her uniform was uncomfortable. She had been exhausted and uncertain whether she truly belonged. That morning, an instructor had given the class a simple lesson she never forgot. Pressure does not create character. Pressure reveals it. At the time, the words sounded ordinary. Now they felt different. Across the courtroom, Detective Ethan Cole remained standing near his attorneys. Earlier, he had filled the room with certainty. Now he seemed smaller somehow. Not physically, emotionally. The confidence that had carried him through weeks of public interviews and official statements no longer looked effortless. Maya noticed him staring toward the rain-covered windows. For several seconds, he appeared lost in thought. Then he looked away. The judge called for a brief recess. Chairs shifted softly across the floor. People stood and stretched. Conversations returned in cautious whispers. Yet Maya stayed where she was. She did not reach for her phone. She did not speak to anyone. There was nobody waiting beside her table. No group of supporters. No family members. No colleagues. Just silence. Strangely, she welcomed it. The quiet allowed her to think. She remembered the headlines. The interviews. The comments posted by strangers who had never met her. Some days those voices had felt louder than her own. But sitting there now, listening to the steady rhythm of rain against glass, she realized something important. The truth had survived without her defending it every hour. It had survived every accusation, every rumor, every assumption. Truth did not need noise. It only needed time. A courthouse employee walked past carrying a tray of coffee cups. The scent drifted briefly through the room before fading away. Maya watched droplets slide down the window nearest the jury box. One drop merged into another, then another, small things becoming something larger. The image lingered in her mind. That was exactly what had happened inside this courtroom. Tiny details, small inconsistencies, overlooked facts. Piece by piece, they had begun forming a picture nobody could ignore. The recess clock ticked quietly on the wall above the courtroom doors. 10 minutes remained before proceedings resumed. Maya lifted her gaze toward the American flag standing beside the bench. The fabric barely moved. Calm, steady, unshaken. For the first time since the investigation began, she felt the same way. And somewhere deep inside, she sensed that whatever came next would not simply reveal what happened during that operation. It would reveal why someone had been so determined to hide the truth in the first place. When the recess ended, the courtroom filled with a different energy. The uncertainty that had dominated the morning was gone. In its place stood anticipation. People returned to their seats more quickly than before. Reporters adjusted cameras. Attorneys reviewed notes that suddenly seemed outdated. Outside, the rain had eased into a light mist, allowing pale afternoon sunlight to filter through the courthouse windows. The room looked brighter, but the tension felt heavier. The judge resumed proceedings and instructed the evidence technician to continue. The next file appeared on the monitor. Unlike the previous recordings, this one carried synchronized audio logs and operational metadata. Every movement was time-stamped. Every transmission was documented. The technician pressed play. The footage opened on the same industrial access road. Vehicles moved through the area while personnel coordinated assignments. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then the audio began. Voices emerged one after another through radio communications. Orders, responses, confirmations. Maya Brooks listened carefully. She remembered hearing many of those transmissions on the day of the operation. But then a voice she had never heard before entered the recording. Calm, authoritative, deliberate. The speaker referenced a change in operational priorities. Several jurors immediately looked up from their notes. The courtroom remained silent. The recording continued. Additional instructions followed. Certain personnel were redirected away from key positions. Access routes were altered. Reporting procedures changed. None of those directives appeared in the official records submitted to investigators. The discrepancy was impossible to ignore. One attorney slowly lowered his pen. Another stared openly at the monitor. Maya watched the reactions spread through the room like ripples across water. Then came the moment that changed everything. The technician opened a linked authorization file recovered from the same evidence archive. The document appeared beside the video feed. Multiple approval codes filled the screen. Names, timestamps, digital signatures. The technician enlarged one section. A collective breath seemed to leave the courtroom at once. Detective Ethan Cole's name appeared repeatedly throughout the authorization chain. Not as a responding officer, not as an observer, as the individual who approved the operational modifications that later disappeared from official reports. The room froze. Nobody whispered. Nobody moved. Maya could hear only the faint hum of the monitor and the distant sound of traffic beyond the courthouse walls. The technician continued. Another file opened automatically. This one contained internal communications recovered from a secure server. Several messages appeared. Their contents were brief but devastating. Discussions about report revisions. Requests to omit certain details. Instructions to consolidate witness statements. None of it directly accused anyone of wrongdoing. Yet together, the communications painted a picture far different from the narrative presented to the public. The judge's expression hardened. One juror removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. Several reporters began typing so quickly their keyboards sounded like rainfall. Across the room, Detective Cole remained standing. His face had lost all color. The confidence that once filled every word and movement had vanished completely. Maya looked toward him and finally understood the fear she had glimpsed earlier. It had never been fear of the evidence itself. It was fear that the truth had survived. For weeks, the story had been about her. Her conduct, her decisions, her character. But now the spotlight had shifted. The evidence was no longer asking whether Maya Brooks could be trusted. It was asking who had worked so hard to ensure she would not be. The atmosphere inside the courtroom felt completely different now. Earlier, people had arrived expecting answers about Maya Brooks. Now every conversation, every glance, every question seemed directed somewhere else. The shift was impossible to ignore. Reporters who had spent weeks examining her career were suddenly focused on the evidence spread across courtroom monitors and legal displays. The judge reviewed several documents in silence before setting them neatly on the bench. Her expression remained composed, but the seriousness in her eyes was unmistakable. Across the room, members of both legal teams whispered quietly among themselves. Some reviewed notes. Others stared at the screen as though hoping the information might somehow change if they looked long enough. It did not. Facts remained facts. Maya sat quietly, her hands resting on the polished wood table before her. The pressure she had carried for weeks seemed lighter now, not because the situation had become easier, but because the truth was finally standing on its own. She no longer felt responsible for convincing anyone. The evidence was doing that work for her. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. Sunlight pushed through the clouds and streamed across the courthouse windows. Bright reflections stretched across the floor, reaching almost to the center aisle. Dust particles drifted through the light like tiny sparks suspended in the air. The scene felt strangely peaceful after so many hours of tension. The judge called for additional testimony related to the newly recovered records. One witness after another confirmed procedural inconsistencies that had never been disclosed during the original investigation. Small details continued aligning with the recovered files. Nothing dramatic, nothing sensational, just truth arriving piece by piece. Maya noticed something unexpected during the testimony. Several people who had avoided looking at her earlier now seemed unable to avoid it. Their expressions carried something different from suspicion. Regret. Not because they had known the truth and ignored it, but because they had accepted a story before seeing all the facts. It was a deeply human mistake, one Maya understood better than most. Detective Ethan Cole remained unusually quiet. The confidence that once filled the room around him had disappeared. He no longer looked like the center of the story. He looked like someone facing consequences larger than himself. Maya studied him for only a moment before looking away. Anger would have been easy. Resentment would have been understandable. Yet neither emotion stayed with her. Too much time had already been lost to accusations and assumptions. She wanted something else. Resolution. The judge eventually paused the proceedings and addressed the courtroom. Her words were measured and careful. She emphasized the importance of complete investigations, accurate reporting, and public trust. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. The room listened. Maya felt the significance of the moment settle quietly around her. This was never about winning. It was never about revenge. It was about restoring something that had been damaged. Trust. Integrity. Truth. As the afternoon sunlight grew brighter, Maya glanced once more toward the American flag standing beside the bench. The colors seemed more vivid now. Red, white, blue. Familiar. Steady. For the first time in many weeks, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Not relief. Not victory. Hope. Because sometimes the most important outcome is not proving someone wrong. It is proving that the truth can still find its way into the light. 3 months later, the courthouse stood beneath a clear blue Georgia sky. The storms of that day were gone, replaced by warm sunlight that reflected from the glass towers surrounding downtown Atlanta. People moved along the sidewalks carrying coffee cups, briefcases, and afternoon plans, unaware that inside one office a chapter had finally come to an end. Captain Maya Brooks stood beside a window overlooking the city. Her uniform was pressed neatly as always. The gold details on her shoulders caught the sunlight, creating small flashes of light whenever she moved. On the desk nearby rested a framed letter of commendation recognizing her professionalism during one of the most difficult periods of her career. She had not asked for recognition. She had not fought for headlines. Yet the truth had a way of leaving its own record behind. The investigation that followed the courtroom hearing had uncovered numerous reporting failures and procedural violations. Several policies were revised. Independent reviews were implemented. Training programs were expanded. The outcome was larger than any single person. It was about restoring confidence in a system people depended upon every day. Maya looked down at the city streets below and thought about how quickly public opinion could change. Weeks earlier, strangers had questioned her character. Now many of those same voices praised her resilience. Neither reaction defined who she was. Her father had taught her that long ago. Character was not built from applause. Character was built from consistency. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Judge Rebecca Whitmore stepped into the office. Although their roles had been very different throughout the proceedings, a quiet respect had formed between them. The judge smiled gently. "I wanted to personally congratulate you," she said. Maya thanked her and offered a seat. For a few moments they spoke about ordinary things. Work, responsibility, service. Before leaving, the judge paused beside the doorway. "You know," she said, "most people spend their lives hoping they never face a test like that." Maya nodded. "I used to think the same thing." The judge smiled. "And now?" Maya looked back toward the window. The city stretched for miles beneath the afternoon sun. "Now I think the test matters less than what you choose to carry out of it." The judge considered that answer for a moment before quietly leaving. The office became still again. Maya walked to the window and rested one hand lightly against the frame. Far below, traffic moved steadily through intersections. Life continued. It always did. Her phone buzzed softly. A message appeared from a young military recruit she had mentored months earlier. "Thank you for showing us what integrity looks like." Maya read the message twice before placing the phone back on her desk. Outside, a breeze moved across the city, invisible yet unmistakable. It stirred flags atop buildings and carried sunlight across rows of glass and steel. Maya closed her eyes briefly and took a slow breath. The accusations were over. The investigations were complete. The noise had faded. What remained was something far quieter, something stronger, the truth. And as the afternoon light filled the room, Captain Maya Brooks stood silently beside the window, watching the city move forward, knowing that sometimes justice does not announce itself with celebration. Sometimes it arrives as a simple moment of peace after everything else has finally fallen silent.